Hello, my name is Mia Hoos, and this is a reading of Jet's Fairy Ring, which is a fairy tale. Jet's Fairy Ring is part of the Jet the Blue Fairy series, and so far I've written about 5 books, and they're all illustrated by me too. And they're written about what I've learned about fairies from my family and friends and experience. And I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, in a deep dark wood, lived a blue fairy called Jet. Her home was inside a hole in a huge oak tree. Jet had lived there since she could remember, which was not very long in human years. It was lovely in her tree. The sun filtered down through the limbs and kept everything aglow. All the acorns and leaves and mushrooms and twigs on the forest floor basked in the light as Jet wandered through them. Her job, as fairies always have a very specific job, was tending the mushrooms. She carried a folded leaf with a drop of water inside and would rub water all over the mushrooms if they asked politely. And it seems the mushrooms were always thirsty. Mushrooms were very important to her tree, Tinador. Tinador was an ancient oak and scattered her acorns all about the forest floor. Some would burst into greenery every spring. It was the job of the mushrooms to help Tinador communicate with her children. If the children were having a problem, she would hear about it and adjust her timing the next spring so the baby acorns would have a better chance. Every day, Jet would happily gather a dewdrop and visit her mushroom friends. Sometimes a squirrel would drop by and ask Tinador if she could give her an acorn or two to store away for the winter. Tinador always said yes, and to take as many as they wanted. The wise oak tree knew the squirrels would bury them all and eventually forget where some of the acorns were. Then the baby acorns would sprout up even further away than Tinador could spread them. A very satisfactory arrangement and worth losing acorns for. The squirrels got food for the winter, and the Tinador's babies spread far and wide. Jet would sometimes find a hungry squirrel in the woods and invite her to visit Tinador and ask for acorns. Jet always advised the squirrel on proper etiquette for acorn acquisition, and the squirrels were very appreciative. Jet had lots of squirrel friends too. The only friends Jet did not have were other fairies. She hadn't seen another fairy for so long. The last was her mother before she faded. Fading was a joyous thing. Jet's mother made sure she understood all about fading before it happened to her. One morning, Pearl, Jet's mother, was sitting on a new green leaf humming softly to herself. She beckoned to Jet to come near. Pearl gently smiled and told Jet it was her time to fade and to sit near her and watch on another leaf. Pearl closed her eyes and got very silent. The light through the tree's limbs got sharper and brighter. All the light seemed to focus on Pearl. Rings of green seemed to rise from the leaf and move up Pearl's body like a little layer cake, and then over her head into the light. Then Pearl began to glow purple. Purple was Pearl's color. Pearl became brighter and brighter so Jet could see right through her. Pearl had a big smile on her face and opened her eyes. They were shining white, and it was hard to look at them. Pearl put her hand to her lips and blew Jet a kiss, and then faded into the light. She was gone. After the fading, Jet had mixed feelings. First, she missed her mother. The little bed Pearl used to have in the tree was empty. Jet missed her humming and singing. The mushrooms and squirrels wondered where Pearl was, but Tenador knew, and Tenador was very quiet. Tenador knew life was changing for Jet. One day, on her mission to water mushrooms, Jet saw a little squirrel crying all alone. She came up on the squirrel and asked what was wrong. That just made the little squirrel cry more. So Jet asked her name instead. The beautiful squirrel looked up through shining eyes and told her, Petra. Jet sat down and patted Petra's fur, making soothing sounds and calling her name. Finally, Petra stopped crying and just sniffed for a while. Jet sat quietly and Petra began to speak. It was such a hard winter. Mother and I had a nice nest in a spruce tree, and we were all cuddled in from the cold. Then a huge wind came and swayed our spruce back and forth, and our nest started falling apart. We were thrown into the snow. I looked and looked but could not find her, so I found a hole and scrunched in. Thankfully, we had buried lots of nuts all around, and I kept as warm as I could on the frozen ground. I would go out and search, but Mother was gone. I searched all winter. Then Petra started crying again, and Jet held her hand. Come visit my friend Tenador, and she will give you some acorns. She will know what to do. So Petra and Jet wended their way back to Tenador and formally requested acorns, please. Petra was still sobbing when Tenador asked Jet to whisper what was wrong with her. Tenador became very silent. Jet, you must go with Petra to her home and help her find her mother. Tenador had a very serious and important feel to her, like she knew something extraordinary. Jet knelt and placed her hands on Tenador's roots and kissed them. Then she took a few acorns in Petra's hand, and off they went into the wood. The trees grew less and less. There were wildflowers all around, and grass was sprouting. She came to some boulders and a nice little gurgling spring, and Petra took a drink. Jet noticed there were not many mushrooms. How could the trees talk? Soon they were in a field with no trees at all. Jet had to squint her eyes to see right. But Petra was getting all excited because she felt Jet would help her find her mother. Finally, they came to a little stand of spruce. Jet looked at them closely and said, This fall, you should look for an oak tree. These spruce are still babies, and they love to bend and sway. No wonder you lost your nest. Petra nodded grimly at this truth and logged into her memory not to build nests in spruces ever again. There was a nice bed of needles at the spruce grove, and they smelled so good that Petra and Jet decided to rest in them a while Jet thought how to find Mother. Really, she had no clue, but she trusted Tenador explicitly. Night came, and Jet rubbed her hands and touched the little spruce cone, which began to glow blue. Petra thought this was wonderful. Jet thought it was just the usual thing, but she saw Petra was happy and hugged her. And they lay in the needles all night as Jet hummed little songs about breezes and spring. Fairies love to sleep just about as much as squirrels. In fact, more so, as Jet found out the next morning. She heard a rustle, 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 and looked over to see Petra frantically digging holes to bury the acorns they had brought. Jet raised up on her elbow and sleepily muttered, What on earth are you making all that racket for? You have all day to bury those acorns. Why don't you come back and sleep some more? Jet had gotten used to the warm squirrel and wanted more cuddle time. Petra kept digging and yelped. I can't help it. For some reason I have to bury acorns. I must. and on, muttering to herself. Jet grumpily turned on her side and closed her eyes, but really, she could not drift off. In a huff, she got to her feet and wandered off to get away from all that racket. As she stood at the edge of the clearing near the spruce grove, Jet thought she heard the little stream they had passed before. So off she walked toward the sound. Maybe she could get a cool drink. As she walked, she realized there was a little trail forming under her feet, leading her toward some rocks and trees. And then, wonder of wonders, Jet saw a mushroom. She was beginning to think there were none on this side of the clearing or anywhere near the clearing. It was a cute little red top mushroom, just like at her home in the forest. Quickly she gathered a little leaf and rolled it into a cone and off to the gurgling creek for a drop of water. Then back to the precious mushroom and cover it with water. The mushroom said thank you graciously and then pointed down the vale, and Jet saw a whole string of little red tops. Off she scampered and happily watered mushrooms all morning. When the sun was high, Jet was worn out and went for a nap by the creek. She found a nice little pad of moss and curled up and soon was asleep. Nice and warm and cuddly, and so bright, and the green smells like a huge fern farm. Jet slowly opened her eyes. She looked up and all she could see was the bright sun. Then someone stood in front of the sun. Jet shaded her eyes and tried to see who it was. Finally, she started to make out a green fairy with blonde hair and beautiful wings. And she was laughing. Thank you very much for watering my mushrooms. My name is Fern. Who are you? Jet sat up and rubbed her eyes. I'm Jet the Blue Fairy, she muttered groggily. Jet felt so awkward, but finally another fairy. She looked up and smiled. Happy to meet you, Fern. Fern sat down in the moss and gave Jet a sweet kiss on her cheek. Then she started peppering her with questions like where, when, how, and all the usual. Jet answered as best she could, but really she didn't have much to offer. Would you like to come visit my home? Fern asked. I have some fresh dew and carrot stew. Oh, yes, blurted out Jet. I would be happy to visit, and I am very hungry. So they started down the path, past a long line of mushrooms that eventually led to Fern's house. It was a magnificent house, so intricate with walls and moss and sticks and flowers growing all around. Did you make this? Asked Jet. No, I'm not much good at making things. A giant made it, and I just moved in. Sometimes the giant visits and sits over there under a tree and watches me water my flowers. Jet looked wearily around, trying to see the giant. Fern saw the look of concern on her face and giggled. Silly Jet, the giant isn't here right now, but not to worry, she just watches. Into the house they went, and Fern got 2 bowls and filled them with carrot stew. It was very good. Lots of crunchy nuts and herbs and, of course, carrots. Cooked just enough to mingle the tastes, but not so much that the carrots might lose their crunchiness. Very good, Fern. Can I have another bowl? Yes, sweetie. I have a guest. We should probably take a bowl to her, too. She is just recovering from a broken foot. Would you like to meet her? Yes, please. Then off they went to the next room and opened the door. And on the bed was a beautiful squirrel cuddled underneath the covers. Hi, Kara. Would you like some carrot stew? I think it's finally time we can take off the bandage. Oh, finally. Can we do that first? And who is this? Jet, meet Kara, my house guest. Hello, Jet. Nice to meet you. Hello, Kara. Please pardon, but do you know a little squirrel called Petra? Kara's face got an excited look, and her eyes were so bright. Petra? She is my daughter. We got separated this winter when a silly spruce tree threw our nest in the snow. Where is she? Oh, Kara, Petra is not far off, resting nicely in a bed of spruce needles, unless she is not busy still burying all the acorns we brought. Jet, Kara, and Fern had a good laugh at that, and settled and enjoyed their carrot stew happily, chatting together and making friends. After dinner, the fairies helped Kara stand and took her outside to the fresh breezes and sat her down under a shady tree. Then off Fern and Jet marched back to the spruces to find Petra. When they arrived, they saw Petra asleep on a needle bed. Petra, did you finish hiding your nuts? Yes, and I'm all worn out. Well, time to get up. We have a wonderful surprise. Petra looked up and saw Fern, all in green, shining in the sun. You found Mama! Petra was pretty smart. Yes, sweetie. She was sick all the time, but she is safe and sound in Fern's home. Would you like to see... Before she could finish, Petra was bounded off down the mushroom trail and was hard to keep up. Jet and Fern had to resort to flying just to keep from not losing her. Soon they were at Fern's home, and Petra and Kara were hugging and kissing and looking so happy. The day wore on, and the fairies and Petra took Kara back to her bed, and Petra cuddled up with Kara and fell fast asleep. Kara looked up at the fairies and whispered, "Thank you," and closed her eyes. Fern and Jet just left the room and sat outside to watch the sun go down. Would you like to come to a fairy circle with me tonight? Asked Fern. Oh, yes. You mean there are more fairies here? Yes, we usually have a dozen or so at the circles. We have our circle on the full moon, and tonight is a full moon. Jet got very excited and a little anguished because she had never been to a circle and did not know how to act. Just follow my lead, Fern said competently. I have been to many circles and know just what to do. So the fairies watched the sun go down over the meadow in beautiful reds and pinks and blues. Crickets began to chirp, and a few cicadas started their droning. The nightingale began to sing, and the moon started to rise on the other side of the meadow that the sun went down in. Jet had never seen sun or moonrise before, having lived in a forest all her life. How spectacular! Soon Fern got up and said it was time to go. As the fairies made their way down the path, they saw a glow in the spruce orchard. Oh, that is my spruce cone, explained Jet. I turned it into a blue light to keep Petra and I company on our first night. Oh, let's take it to the circle. All the other fairies will be so impressed, exclaimed Fern. So Jet wrapped up the cone in a catawba leaf and put it on her head, and off they went to the circle. There were already some fairies there. Jet could almost see them all like it was day. You could even see your shadow in the bright moonlight. She placed her cone and happily unwrapped it. All the fairies gasped and clapped and gathered around the cone. Jet had made a great first impression. She was so happy. Pretty soon a golden fairy flew in with her harp and started playing. All the fairies held hands and began dancing in a circle around the cone. It was a simple dance, sort of like skipping. First to the left, then to the right. Fairies on each side of Jet helped her with the steps. Everyone was giggling, and some actually started singing. Spirits got higher and higher, and soon fairies began taking off. Soon the whole circle was skipping in air. It was so different than the flying Jet was used to, more like floating than flapping wings. And the feelings were so deep and soothing. All the fairies burst into song. Even Jet began to sing. She found she knew the words even though she had never sung that song before. What a magical night! Pretty soon, the fairies collapsed in contented exhaustion in the soft grass around the cone. Fairies rolled in the grass, teasing each other and giggling like children. Everyone was so happy, and the birds started singing. Where they came from was a huge mystery. The moon shone so brightly now that Jet could make out a ring of mushrooms nearby. "It's time for the mushroom circle," laughed Fern. "What is that?" asked Jet. "Oh, you will find out. Just don't mind the little white mushroom tendrils. It's their way of holding hands." The fairies gathered around the mushrooms, and Fern brought the glowing cone and placed it in the center of the ring. This was going to be special. Each fairy knelt behind a mushroom and placed her hands on the ground next to its base. Soon the little soft white tendrils poked their heads out of the ground and gently caressed each fairy hand. Jet felt a thrill inside her like nothing she had ever felt. She closed her eyes, and many beautiful forms swirled in her mind, some with little faces peering into her eyes. One face looked long and hard at her, and then poof, it disappeared in a cloud of blue smoke. Jet's eyes popped wide open. Something had happened. Everyone was looking at her. The mushroom let go of her hands, and she fell down and was asleep before she hit the ground. Next morning, she felt a nudge on her shoulder. Fern was kneeling beside her with a big smile on her face. Wake up, sleepyhead," and then kissed her on the cheek. Jet propped herself up on an elbow and looked around. Everyone was gone, including the mushrooms. Wow! Where did everyone go? A bewildered Jet asked. "Oh, they are about somewhere. Some went down to the creek for a swim. But look, I have something for you." The mushrooms left it with your name on it. Fern walked over to a clump of daisies and picked up a little package. She proudly brought it back to Jet and placed it in her lap. It looked like a huge butterfly chrysalis, and the name Jet was there right at the top and on the side of a little mushroom brand of sorts. How curious! "You must water it every day until it hatches," laughed Fern. Jet stroked the little chrysalis and started humming a little lullaby Pearl had taught her. She was so drawn to it. Her heart felt so warm and cozy with it near her. Soon she was hugging and purring with the little thing. She didn't have much time to wonder why she was feeling this way. It all seemed so natural. Fern smiled to herself. That had gone smoothly. She helped Jet up and picked up the cone, and they walked back to her house. Petra and her mother had gone, so Jet cuddled up in her bed and cuddled the little chrysalis and fell asleep. About noon, Jet woke and felt a strange longing to go home. She cradled her new friend and stumbled into the main room where Fern was making lunch. "I thought I would make you some food for your journey back. Y'all can stay as long as you want, but I have the feeling that you are getting homesick." Fern was so wise. "Oh, thank you, Fern. You are so sweet, and you are reading my mind, too." They hugged and kissed and sat down at the table, smiling at each other. Soon Jet was saying goodbye and following the trail back home. So much had happened. All the joys of the last 2 days streamed into her mind. She must come back often to visit, especially her new friend Fern. She had invited Fern to Denador Clearing to meet her sturdy oak tree, but she knew the time would be just too long for her. It was getting late when she finally got home. She could hear the mushrooms greeting her and griping a bit about being thirsty. So she hung the chrysalis up on a little branch and cuddled in her moss for a nice sleep, because in the morning She must see to her mushrooms. Days passed, and Jet happily watered her mushrooms and greeted squirrels dropping by for acorns. The chrysalis got larger and larger and started getting a deep yellowish-green hue. Jet had to move it to a larger branch. She would hug it from time to time and rock it in her lap and wonder what it was the mushroom had given her. One day, Jet was instructing a squirrel when she heard giggling from the tree cave. She rushed in, and there, fallen from the branch, was the chrysalis with a large rip down its side and a little face peering out. Jet pulled at the split, and suddenly 2 little arms popped out, and then a face, and then lots of red hair, and then wings. It was a baby fairy. Soon the little arms were around her neck, and her face was covered with kisses. Wow! How on earth did this happen? Was she related to mushrooms? So many questions. She would have to visit Fern soon. Happiness dwelt in Jet's house, and the spring days turned into summer, and Jet loved her baby with all her heart. The end.